We're literally surrounded by print, books, posters, newspapers, even the label on your water bottle. It's everywhere, so much so that we kind of forget there was ever a time without it, a time when the written word was this incredibly rare, precious thing. So let's dive in and explore how this one technology completely reshaped our world.
No, really, just try to picture it for a second. No mass-produced books, no daily newspapers, no instruction manuals for anything. Every single piece of information would have to be passed along by word of mouth, or in these super rare, handwritten texts. I mean, that was the world for most of human history.
Before print, every single book was basically a work of art, but it was also an unbelievable amount of work. Think about it. Scribes would have to painstakingly copy every single letter by hand. The whole process was slow, it was incredibly expensive, and hey, people make mistakes, so it was full of errors. And what that means is that knowledge was basically locked away, something only the super wealthy or the monks in their monasteries could get their hands on.
But here's the thing, the story of print doesn't actually start in Europe like most of us think. Nope. The first spark of this whole revolution was ignited hundreds of years earlier, way over in East Asia.
It all kicked off back in 6th century China with something called woodblock printing. From there, Buddhist missionaries took the tech over to Japan, and by the year 868, they created something absolutely incredible, the world's oldest known complete printed book, the Diamond Sutra.
And the way they did it, it was absolutely ingenious. Craftsmen would carve an entire page, we're talking text and pictures, onto a single block of wood. Then they'd ink it up and press paper against it. Simple, right? But it was so effective, and it was the very first step toward mass communication as we know it. So at first, the Chinese state used this for something super practical, printing tons and tons of textbooks for their civil service exams. But then, by the 17th century, a new urban culture was booming, and people wanted entertainment. Suddenly, you've got novels, poetry, and plays being printed. And, for the very first time, women could get their own work published. A huge deal. All right, so let's hop over to Europe, where this Eastern technology was about to get a major upgrade and become this explosive, world-changing force. So when Marco Polo came back from China, he brought this idea of woodblock printing with him. And yeah, it was an improvement for sure, but Europe's demand for books was just skyrocketing thanks to new universities and a growing merchant class. Scribes couldn't keep up, and even the woodblocks were too slow. Something had to give. A real breakthrough was needed.
And boy, did that breakthrough arrive. Enter Johann Gutenberg in Germany. Now, Gutenberg was a master goldsmith, and he grew up seeing wine and olive presses work every day. He had this brilliant aha moment and combined these ideas. He took the model of the press, but instead of a woodblock, he used individual reusable metal letters. You know it as movable type.
But the real game changer here? It was pure speed. A monk might work all day just to copy a single page. Gutenberg's press? It could crank out 250 sheets on one side in just 1 hour. I mean, you just can't overstate how massive that leap was.
And the result? Whoa, it was staggering. In the last half of the 1400s, something like 20 million books hit the market in Europe. A century later, that number exploded tenfold to a whopping 200 million. It wasn't a trickle, it was a tidal wave of information.
This explosion of technology didn't just mean more books. It created something you and I take for granted, a mass reading public. The entire way people took in information was about to be flipped on its head.
So, before print, you were part of what historians call a hearing public. Knowledge wasn't something you read silently, it was performed. Sacred texts were read out loud in church, stories were told, ballads were sung, but these new cheap books created a reading public. For the first time, you could sit alone, in silence, with a text, and form your own private thoughts about it.
Okay, but wait, most people couldn't even read, right? So how on earth did printers sell all these books? Well, they got really clever. They started printing popular ballads and folktales, stuff people already knew from hearing them told. They crammed the pages with pictures and illustrations, and people would buy these books and take them to taverns and village squares to be read aloud, kind of blurring the line between that old hearing culture and the new reading one. And with millions of books now flying around, the people in charge, the kings, the church, they quickly realized they'd let a genie out of the bottle. They had unleashed a force that they just could not control. And maybe the first person to really weaponize this new technology was Martin Luther. In 1517, he writes his famous 95 Theses, slamming the Catholic Church.
And thanks to the press, his ideas didn't take years to spread. They took weeks. They were all over Germany, igniting the Protestant Reformation. To a guy like Luther, the printing press was a gift from God.
But not everyone was celebrating. You had scholars like Erasmus who were actually terrified of this flood of print. They were worried that without any control, all kinds of rebellious and, irreligious ideas would spread like a plague, destroying scholarship and creating total chaos.
And this anxiety, it was real. You can feel it. Look at this woodcut. It shows the printer shop as a site of a dance of death, with skeletons literally running the press. To a lot of people, this wasn't a gift from God. This was a machine heralding the end of the world. And this wasn't just abstract fear. The stakes were life and death. Let me tell you about a guy named Menocchio, an Italian miller from the 16th century. He got his hands on some books, read the Bible for himself, and started coming up with his own ideas the church really didn't like. For the crime of reading and thinking for himself, he was hunted down by the Inquisition and eventually executed. Okay, so let's shift gears and travel a bit, because this story played out very differently when print landed in India, a place with its own incredibly rich literary traditions. See, before print, India had this amazing tradition of handwritten manuscripts, a lot of them on these delicate palm leaves. They were beautiful and unique, but also fragile and definitely not for everyone. Print comes along and introduces something totally new, standardized, durable, and cheap texts that could reach the masses. The change was huge. So the press first shows up in India with Portuguese missionaries, but it didn't take long for Indians to grab this tool for themselves, starting their own newspapers by the late 18th century. Soon, it became a powerful weapon for social reformers like Jyotiba Phule to attack the caste system, and for nationalists to build support for an independent India. And of course, the colonial government got nervous and cracked down with heavy censorship, like the Vernacular Press Act.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway? The print revolution was never just about the technology. It was about completely remaking societies, remaking institutions, and even remaking our very sense of who we are. I mean, think about it. Print created brand new audiences. Suddenly women, children, and workers were readers. It gave us new kinds of writing like the novel, which is all about individual experiences. Through newspapers, it connected people who would never meet, creating the very idea of a nation. For the first time, people could see their own lives and ideas printed and shared, which fundamentally shaped their sense of identity in a way that just wasn't possible before. From the woodblock to the World Wide Web, the way we share information literally defines our world. The printing press opened the door to the modern age of individualism and the nation-state. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? As we live through our own massive information revolution right now, what new world are we building? What comes next?